now, please join me in welcoming to the podium Congressman Dan Crenshaw.
Thank you, Hector. Another round of applause for my stepmother, Carmen, for putting we really created a political animal. Didn't see that one coming. But when she puts her mind to something, it happens. So there she is. Cecilia Abbott, thank you. Another round of applause for you. Thank you for being here, Cecilia. I'll give you all a little update about what it's like to be in Washington and how we need to win this battle that we face. And we're going to do it through organizations like this, with the understanding that what matters, the colors that matter, are the red, white, and blue. And that identity politics that the Democrats keep pushing will ultimately divide and destroy us. And this is about ideas. This is about the ideas that work and confronting the ideas that don't. You know, living in Washington and dealing with the Democratic Party, it's like living in a fantasy world. That's not in a good way. It's actually quite concerning. There are policy-related fantasies, for instance, like the idea that there isn't a crisis worth addressing at our southern border, even though there were over 100,000 apprehensions just last month. Border Patrol is sounding the alarm and Congress pretends not to hear it. Or pretending in economic fantasies, like modern monetary theory. It's this idea that you can spend money in an infinite way instead of actually governing responsibly. Or the notion that eliminating all fossil fuels within 10 years, like the Green New Deal would have us do, would magically create a wonderful world of pure solar and wind, and suddenly weather patterns will start to look like San Diego. These are fantasies. These are pure fantasies. They're not based on any sense of reality. But they are based on a deeper, more dangerous fantasy. It's the cultural narrative that is taking root in our society, and those policy proposals I mentioned are the manifestation of that. That cultural narrative is one that prizes victimhood above all else, and the notion that you are not required to be responsible for yourself. It is a cultural narrative that views everything through a lens of victims and oppressors. This is the most dangerous fantasy of all, this idea that others should be responsible for you, because it creates a society full of people who are resentful, angry, disempowered, and demanding services from others. It's a fantasy because there isn't a society in history that could survive with that mentality at its foundational core. It's inherently unsustainable. To be an aggrieved victim is actually a virtue in this new cultural narrative. Everyone seems to be looking for a reason why they might be oppressed or victimized. We no longer value someone who is tough-minded and self-reliant. In fact, the far left actually attacks people within their own party that dare to value success. They want you to be a victim. It's a fantasy because there isn't a society in history that could survive with that mentality. Again, it is unsustainable. This is one of the most important battles that we face. It's a fight for some of the basic cultural principles that keep our country afloat. Personal responsibility is a good thing. Being mentally tough is a good thing. Loving your country and founding ideals it was built upon is a good thing. Believing in God is a good thing. If we have a whole society full of people who don't subscribe to these things, then it becomes really, really easy to buy off voters with promises of more stuff. We'll take care of you in this way. We'll take care of everything, politicians say. Don't worry, just vote for me. Someone else will pay for it because they have oppressed you, and you should be upset about it. It creates resentment and divisive, horrible identity politics. The politicians don't care as long as it works to get them into power. If we want to save our country, I think we have to remind people of the real reasons we became successful in the first place. We need to have gratitude for our founding ideals of individual liberty, local government control, equal rights, and an understanding that government exists in order to protect your unalienable rights. It does not exist so that it can serve its own agenda, tax you as much as mathematically possible, and implement benevolent programs dreamed up by academics. We are a free people, and a people that can't be bought off by fantasies of socialist utopias. We know better. We know better. We're smarter than that. And we need to win the fantasy wars if we're going to keep our country on track. So we have to talk about the values that do work. Number one, personal responsibility. We talk about this often, but we don't always explain why it's so important. It's important because it's the only human attribute that can lead to self-empowerment. To be empowered is arguably the most crucial pillar of human success, and it is solely derived from a sense of responsibility, a sense that you are responsible for your actions, and that you succeed based on your merits, that you are in control of your own destiny. Number two, mental toughness, discipline. Do the injustices that we face make us crumble, or do they harden our resolve? Do we tell stories of victimhood, about how unfair life is, or how the system is rigged against us? Or do we tell a story of facing adversity and then overcoming it? We must be a people that relish and respect hard work, discipline, and competition. It's what drives America forward, because if you can't be mentally tough and disciplined, then you can't compete in the free market. If you can't compete, well then you will want to live off the hard work of others, and the notion of socialism starts to become pretty appealing. Number three, we have a sense of duty. By this I mean there's a sense of loyalty to our own country, and specifically our country's founding ideals. In other words, patriotism. We have an identity as a country. We strive to be connected by a certain set of ideals based on our founding documents and embodied by the American flag, the national anthem, and the Pledge of Allegiance. And everyone in this room knows plenty about this principle. Number four, virtue. We are charitable. We are moral. We show respect and kindness. We are grateful for the Judeo-Christian history that provides us with our set of morals. We recognize where it comes from and why it can't be changed or traded away. We strive to be morally good and kind and fair and charitable. Deep down we know that if we aren't willing to help our own neighbor and instead rely on the government to do it, then we have a society in decay and a society that cannot possibly last. And we know that our morality is absolute because it comes from God. It's not based on our opinion or social whims. And last but not least, liberty. It's about individual freedom and the ability to self-govern. I don't think I need to expand on what liberty is for you, but it is worth pointing out that you can't have liberty without all of the other values I just mentioned. They have to be firmly woven within the cultural narratives that we tell ourselves. For instance, if you're not personally responsible, then you're not empowered. And if you're not empowered, then you can't be mentally tough. And if you're not mentally tough, you can't survive in a competitive, free society. If you're not personally responsible, then by definition, you believe others should be responsible for you. Thus, you must infringe or ask politicians to infringe on their freedoms. So say goodbye to liberty. If you can't take personal responsibility, then it's highly unlikely that you would take responsibility for the country or feel any sense of duty towards that country. So say goodbye to another foundational bedrock. And finally, if we're not a moral people with concrete, unchangeable virtues, then how on earth can we be trusted with any kind of freedom? All of these elements build on one another. They're required. And together they define the American ethos, and they allow us to achieve the American dream. As you know, these elements are only held in high regard by the Republican Party. We're the only ones who seek to defend them. So why is it important that we know these virtues and discuss them? If we don't define our own principles and articulate to the world why they matter and why they are correct, then we allow Democrats to define us as something we are not. We run the risk of losing the spirit of the American experiment. Democrats are not hiding their true intentions. Their solutions are pretty simple. More government, higher taxes, and more spending, more control over you. Worse, they will promise different identity groups power over others. It is the worst of identity politics. They want to treat Americans the opposite way we treat our children. Let me explain. We teach our kids, if we love them, we teach them to be self-reliant, to be personally responsible, to work hard and to know that their actions have consequences. Democrats encourage Americans to rely on others, to rely on government programs to solve their every problem. They try to make Americans believe they cannot be self-sufficient and that the government knows how to spend their money best. They want Americans to believe their personal actions have no consequences. Democrats want Americans to need them. That's why they keep promising more and more government programs. You would only teach somebody that, you would only treat somebody that way if you did not want them to succeed. We know better. We believe in the strength and determination of each American. We believe Americans know best what to do for them, not the government. Keeping the White House, the Senate, and winning back the House can only happen when we share our message of personal responsibility and our cultural narratives and why they're so important. America is a compilation of the best ideas that the world ever had. From moral virtue in Jerusalem to reason from Athens, the rule of law from Rome, to the idea that even kings are subject to law from London. And we wrote them all down in Philadelphia. When we wrote them all down, we created the greatest idea that humankind ever had, and we're not about to let it be squandered. So thank you for being here, and thank you for fighting for that wonderful idea.